folks. Welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Sunday, July the 2nd, 2017, and I have the very distinct honor and great pleasure of welcoming back to the show the president and director of both K92 Mining and Kenadyr Mining, Mr. Bryan Slusarchuk. Bryan has significant international experience structuring, financing, and operating companies involved in mineral exploration, development, and production. In addition to experience operationally and in the conducting of equity raises, Mr. Slusarchuk has structured complex debt financing transactions in the United States, Canada, and Europe with multiple top-tier banks. This includes negotiating and securing the first ever financing of a mineral exploration company by a European bank for reconstruction and development. Mr. Slusarchuk is past TEDx speaker on the topic of capital markets, was a senior advisor at a top-tier Canadian brokerage firm, and is a member of multiple mining industry advocacy associations in emerging markets through which he has regularly advised various governments on the formation of mining policy. He has experience on the board of and as an officer of multiple publicly traded and private companies in Canada, United States, and Europe. Bryan was a founder of and is currently the president of K92 Mining, and you can find them listed on the Toronto Ventures Exchange under the symbol KNT. And he is also the president and director of Kenadyr Mining, and they are listed on the Toronto's Venture Exchange under the symbol KEN, and on the OTC market under the symbol KNDYF. Bryan, welcome back to the Daily Coin.
Rory, thanks a lot for having me on.
I'm really glad that you're here. And we were talking just before we started recording about the rebalancing and what's happening. There still seems to be a little bit of a question, where there was last week, whether or not the rebalancing was actually over. And I wanted to ask you how the central banks have affected what's actually happening. So I'm sure you remember several central banks acquired large positions in some of the mining companies last September to the tune of around $2 billion. I mean, what role in the decision to do this rebalancing, if any, do you think that the central banks played? I mean, from my perspective, it seems very odd that that central banks were in this market in the first place. I mean, what do you think, Bryan?
You know, Rory, it's really interesting to look at it from that perspective. From our perspective as a mining company or a group of mining companies, what we saw out there in the marketplace over the last few months was a real long-term bullish view from portfolio managers on gold equities. However, there was complete hesitance to enter the market or add to positions until this GDXJ rebalancing was finished. And what that did is it led to a downturn of interest and therefore a downturn of equity prices over this period of time. And it's really beat the sector up that otherwise looks to have very good fundamentals. As far as the role of the central banks, as you know, Rory, I'm not a big fan of how the central banks around the world have acted in collusion over the past number of years. And it's really been a series of events that can only be described as a worldwide failure of central bank policy on an ongoing basis. As far as participation by various central banks in the underlying equities themselves, well, that's an interesting angle to look at. I think it begs a whole lot of questions. But that being said, what I can comment on is really the impact on the equities. And it's been an impact that, in my opinion, again, has led to a situation where there are a lot of undervalued companies out there in the gold space that are doing good things, but have been beaten up despite very good fundamental progress.
with the global economy beginning to slow and major cracks and local economies coming apart at the seams, I mean, how do you think that Trump will be able to turn the American economy around? Will he be able to? I mean, will he have the support to initiate policies that will, in fact, stimulate the economy?
You know, Rory, I'm sure there is a route through this global malaise and weakening, but it's difficult to see that the past decades of failed fiscal policy, failed monetary policy all over the world, quantitative easing infinity via the failed policies of multiple central banks has led to a situation that's really tough to turn around. It is trying to turn around a freight train going the wrong way on a moment's notice. So I think President Trump, as far as the United States goes, really has his hands tied in a number of ways, and hopefully he can work his way through some of the issues that he has inherited. On a global basis, I think that Europe is a basket case, as we've seen from afar here in so many ways. I think that you've got really difficult economic conditions in Europe. You've got difficult geopolitical, socioeconomic conditions. And the fact is that this is a tinderbox waiting to be ignited. And it's definitely scary times. And with that, I go back to the fact that we do need to look at gold as a potential investment, a potential hedge, a potential safeguard against all of this type of uncertainty. Gold has been money for thousands of years, long before these esteemed central bankers deemed it to be no longer of importance or relevance. So I think everybody should look at gold equities and gold itself as a potential part of a portfolio.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, gold has been money for 4,000 or 5,000 years, and silver's actually been money longer than gold. So the cryptocurrencies have been stealing all the headlines for the past couple of months, but they've only been. Bitcoin was born in 2009, so a short 8 years ago. But gold and silver, thousands of years. I mean, sometimes history does matter.
Absolutely.
And speaking of which, I mean, you are heavily involved in two different gold mining ventures. And I was out on your site for Kenadyr over the weekend and earlier today, and you guys have a project that's in the Kyrgyz Republic. Most people probably know, if they've ever heard of it, is probably know it as Kyrgyzstan. Why don't you, if you would, Bryan, tell us what you've got going on, because it looks like a really very cool operation that you have going on over there. I mean, it's right on the border of China, and the Kyrgyz Republic, I believe, is kind of in between China and Russia. So you're right in the thick of it with the SCO and the Silk Road and everything that they've got going on in that part of the world. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us what you got going on with this project.
Sure, absolutely, Rory. This is a very exciting project, first off, because of the geology. It's on a belt that has created some of the world's highest grade, some of the world's largest gold deposits. Now, we were fortunate to be introduced to this project by a fellow named Alex Becker, who is the CEO of the company. And Alex has successfully worked and operated in this country for 20 years. So he's not only written some of the real landmark papers on mineralization in this gold belt, but he's got hands-on experience, successful experience in the country for the past 20 years. Outside of the geological upside, what's important to note is that our property has had immense past investment. The Soviet-era drill programs within our property identified high-grade historical estimates. In fact, in one of our zones of interest on the property, there's a historical estimate of 900,000 ounces at 8.3 grams per ton. And this zone is called the South Zone. Very high grade, very large. Now, what we have to do is go in and look at these historical estimates and see how they stack up with modern technology. And what our geological thesis is that we will see increased grade based on the use of modern techniques. And in part, Rory, this is because of the fact that historically, drill core recoveries during the Soviet era were very poor, often running at 40, 50%, averaging 60%. And these recoveries were preferentially poor in the softer areas of the zone that were often associated with high-grade gold mineralization. So our theory is that by using modern techniques, getting 95, 99% core recoveries, we'll see an increase in grade. And our first couple of holes here this year have, I believe, demonstrated that. We've had a couple of incredible holes, one in the South Zone that I've mentioned, one in the East Zone. The East Zone hole was a 50-meter cut of 8.15 grams per ton gold and really good distribution of grade throughout the hole. So quite an incredible start to the program. Now, outside of this, I'll also note this can get bigger. The South Zone, as an example, is wide open in every direction. It's wide open at depth. But more important for everybody to understand here is that, of course, these numbers sound like potentially world-class numbers, but at the same time, you need to know where this project is. And this project completely encircles, it surrounds the operating mine of a super major. We completely encircle, completely surround Zijin's TBL mine. In fact, our geologists believe there's connectivity of the mineralization on our South Zone to the deposit that they're currently mining. So this is obviously huge for a variety of factors, not the least of which is that the logistics are excellent, and there's a company right next door that's just invested $300 million moving into production.
Wow. I didn't read the number that you had, that company had 300 million. I know you guys had them surrounded, and there's all kinds of infrastructure already in place with the roads and the electricity that's needed in order to make everything run and operate. And if you go from 900,000, potentially 900,000 ounces in the ground to, I guess it could go up to 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million ounces with the new technologies, depending on how old the technology was that originally discovered the 900,000 ounces.
Yeah, well, it's significant. What we do know is that the historical estimates are already large. It's wide open in every direction. We've drilled 2 holes this year, one in the South, one in the East Zone. Both have been big, wide cuts of high-grade gold mineralization. So it's just a starting point. Your listeners are hearing about this opportunity quite early. Like I say, 2 holes into the 2017 program. But the upside here is just immense. The fact that we're next door to a super major is just a bonus to this really incredible geological endowment.
It's really, I imagine you're really excited about all this.
Oh, it really, we're just blown away by the results in these first 2 holes. There's much more work to be done. We've got a world-class team over there. Like I said, Alex Becker's leading the way. Doug Kerwin, who was credited with leading the discovery team at the Monster Oyu Tolgoi deposit, is one of our directors. Mark Eaton is on the team. Mark was former head of global mining sales at CIBC. Really incredible group of people attracted to this project. So it'll be really interesting to see how it unfolds, but it started off really well, Rory.
It sounds really, really great. I'm very happy for you guys, and I believe that you guys have found some cobalt on this property as well. And as more and more companies move towards alternative energy, I mean, cobalt will play a very significant role, I would imagine. I mean, can you briefly describe the importance of cobalt to these new green energies that we hear about all the time?
Absolutely, Rory. And just to clarify, the Kenadyr property, gold-centric, gold-focused, I'm an independent director on a company called First Cobalt, which has just announced a couple of very significant transactions. That company trades as FCC on the TSX venture. But cobalt, of course, is a big part of this electrification theme. It's an essential ingredient into electrification of vehicles. It's used in smartphones. And as the cobalt demand has grown, supply really hasn't kept up with it. Cobalt is often a byproduct. There just aren't that many primary cobalt properties in the world. And what First Cobalt has done is not only identified some leading properties within the Canadian environment. First Cobalt owns the former Kenadyr Frontier mine, as an example, but has also acquired some great projects in DRC, which is home to most of the world's cobalt production, and has recently announced some transactions, including a very important transaction that people should look into with a company out of Australia called Cobalt One. So I'm an independent on that versus my active management role at Kenadyr and at K92, but I've been really pleased to follow the progress that these guys are making and think they're really onto something, and they're definitely in the space with cobalt as the metal. They're definitely in a space that's attracting emerging amounts of attention. And that's got a great leadership team. Trent Mell, as the CEO, has done a wonderful job with that company.
Do you ever sleep?
Not as of late, but it's a great feeling to be involved in these projects, and we've got some great operators. John Lewins has just done a great job at K92 on the production restart. The Kenadyr operation, led by Alex Becker, has just exceeded expectations out of the get-go, and Trent Mell has done an incredible job with First Cobalt. So being in not the driver's seat, but the passenger seat and actively involved in situations like this, I just feel really blessed.
Yeah, it's sounds like you're in a really good position, Bryan. And how do you see? We were talking about gold and silver a minute ago. How do you see the year playing out for gold and silver? Is it up, down, sideways? I mean, they both had snot kicked out of them earlier today. Looks a little nefarious to me from where I sit. But how do you see how do you see gold and silver playing out the rest of the year?
You know, I'm very bullish on both. I think that it's tough to tell what the exact catalyst will be for the big move up in gold and silver, but the macro conditions out there, as I mentioned earlier, geopolitically, socioeconomically, global tension, as well as this ongoing failed monetary and fiscal policy of the central banks and big governments around the world, issues in Europe, issues in North America. I think that it bodes very well. It is a tinderbox. It's tough to tell what that match strike will end up being, whether it's a big financial crisis of some sort, whether it's some sort of big political tension in the Middle East that explodes. It's tough to tell what the catalyst will be, but all the conditions are there for a big move up in gold and silver. And underlying this, or underpinning it, I should say, is really this disastrous monetary policy of essentially almost every government in the world, and the ongoing collusion of the central bankers attempting to prop up a failed fiat system of currencies. So I'm very bullish, Rory, on gold and silver.
I agree, and with the shenanigans that we saw earlier today on the COMEX, I learned over the weekend Budapest Stock Exchange has just made an agreement with the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and they are now going to be offering gold through the Budapest Exchange utilizing the Shanghai Gold Exchange price mechanism instead of the LBMA or the COMEX. They're going to be using the Shanghai. Is this the lighting of the fuse for the elimination of the LBMA and the COMEX? I mean, it seems like a significant move. Budapest market might not be that big, but they got a lot of people around them.
Yeah, I think, Rory, it's symbolic when I hear things like this about the general move to the east, because as our central bankers, our esteemed central bankers in places like the United Kingdom, like Canada, have sold gold to fund an insatiable appetite for fiat paper. The East, China, Russia, the Middle East has been gobbling up gold quicker than they can get their hands on it. And I see a general trend here as to a long game from the East, really to the detriment of the West, in that there seems to be a growing shift that's predicated on the fact that the East realizes how important physical assets are, how important physical gold is versus paper gold. And this is symbolic of that.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And I think that I definitely would agree that it's a symbolic move, and it's more of a signal to say we're done with the paper shenanigans. We want to deal with physical metal. We want to deal with a pricing mechanism that reflects physical metal, and that's it. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. And I want to stay with the East here for the last question. And as the global economy continues to slow, Bryan, how will China be able to continue forward progress on the Belt and Road Initiative? I mean, if China's economy, as many analysts continue saying, if it's going to fall off a cliff, I mean, wouldn't it make sense for China to turn inward and at least until the dust settles, instead of focusing on outward projects like some people probably know it as the New Silk Road or the One Belt, One Road. They finally settled on Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Well, it's going to be interesting to follow that progress, because what we've seen, obviously, in recent decades and recent years for sure, is a continuance of the outwardly view that China has taken, and they continue to look outward rather than inward. Now, does an economic bust of some sort in China change that direction? It very well could. But at this point, I know from the mining industry perspective, we continue to see China invest heavily in places within Africa, within South America, even in North America, where other sources of capital, traditional sources of capital, have dried up. Do they continue that? Well, at this point, they're continuing it. If they do fall off a cliff economically, as you've mentioned, is a real possibility, I do think they likely would look inward. That seems to be the natural reaction of any large country, any large government over time. However, at this point, there's very little indication that we've seen out there that points to that. I know in the mining space, they continue to be the major players as far as investment in new initiatives outside of their borders.
They are not afraid to continue moving their overall plans forward. They are not scared of that at all. Well, Bryan, is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
You know, Rory, I think that now is really a time of opportunity out there. The gold equities have been beaten up because of the GDXJ rebalance overhang. That's now done with, or close to done with. And just in terms of seasonality, it's a good time to be looking at these gold equities. And if you believe in gold bullion, traditionally in bullish environments for bullion, you see gold equities outperform. So I'd really welcome investors to take a look at situations like K92 Mining, like Kenadyr, because I think there's a lot of upside here specifically with those companies, but also from a macro environment. I think gold and silver are going to be a good place to be in the 12 months going forward.
I agree with all of that. And Bryan, I certainly appreciate it. And we've been speaking with Bryan Slusarchuk. He is the president and director of both K92 Mining and Kenadyr Mining. Yeah, and you can find Kenadyr listed on the Toronto's Venture Exchange under the symbol KEN, and you can find it in the U.S. on the OTC market under the symbol KNDYF. And you can find K92 Mining listed on the Toronto's Venture Exchange under the symbol KNT, and I believe that same symbol they can use in the United States as well. Is that right, Bryan? The KNT?
Yes. KNT trades in the U.S. under the symbol KNTNF.
KNTNF, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's on the over-the-counter, the OTC market.
Yes, correct.
All right. And Bryan, I certainly appreciate all your time this afternoon. And I cannot wait to get an update on what's going on with these projects because they sound really great.
Great. Thanks for your time, Rory.